Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm your host, Tim Niederreiter, and I'm in a wind-struck town right now. Erie, Pennsylvania. Westernmost county in the entire state, as far as I'm aware. This is where my parents grew up, in this town. But anyway, you can refer to the last episode as to why I'm out here. Because I think I mentioned it, but my grandmother just passed away, but that's not really what we're here to talk about. But is it? Because there's always stories that you find in life, right? I've never been more inspired than in the last couple months than I have been this last week. And it's kind of weird. It's weird to admit it. Writers aren't ordinary in that regard, maybe. Or at least I'm not. I wouldn't say all writers are like me. That's usually a bad recipe to start with. No, I'm walking around this neighborhood. It's a nice town. I've been here many times in the past, of course, even though I've never really lived in the area. And today we went to the cemetery, not for the funeral, that's tomorrow. But the day you hear this, probably I'll be going right there for the funeral. But there were stories on the headstones, and I know Joanna Penn talks about this. She loves her graveyards and stuff, or cemeteries. And I'm not quite the same. I don't have as much experience with it, but it is compelling to walk by a bunch of stones. They're just the beginning and the end of a story. Sometimes there's more to this story, and that's on the additional stones, right? The ones next door. The ones that say husband or wife or father or mother. But as I was walking through this kind of wind-ravaged, there was a big windstorm the night we drove in. This wind-ravaged cemetery. Just looking around at the plot where they're going to lay my elders to rest. I guess it got me thinking, because, stories are much more than a beginning and an end. In fact, it's pretty obvious that most of the story is the middle. And that's interesting to me, because that's the part I'm always rushing to get through. And that's a symptom of life, symptom of me being the kind of guy who wants to get it done, the American attitude. Maybe American, maybe it's everyone, I don't know. I don't have enough experience with people who don't live in America to think that it might be otherwise elsewhere. Maybe it's a human thing to just not appreciate where you are and what you're doing and just walk. But anyway, I realized that I've been shirking the middle of my stories a little bit, At least that's what gets me stuck. So think about it. I'm not going to talk a whole lot today. This is going to be a quick episode because I'm busy, you get the idea. But when you're stuck in your story, you don't worry about whether it's the beginning or the middle or the end that's close, or that's where you are. You're just writing. You're living. You're walking through your story world one step at a time. And there's something really pretty about that. There's something beautiful about that, in fact. Because when one is in their story, when you're in your story, you're all there, right? Who you are in real life, sometimes you even fade away. And it just becomes a much, maybe almost spiritual experience. I know I've had guests on recently, like W.L. Hawken, and, go a little bit further back, we get, Bruce Solheim, who will talk about the spiritual side of things in a way, different ways for each of them. But for me, there's always been a spiritual side to writing. Maybe it's just become a spiritual person. Not everyone is. But I like that feeling. And I got that feeling again in the graveyard today. I wrote a little poem. Maybe I'll share it with you sometime soon. And I just called it Headstone. It's a little bit... It probably needs work. I wrote it in the car on the way out from the graveyard, from the cemetery. And it probably does need work, but doesn't everything. And there was still this inspiration right there. Right there. Where there's so many people, so many bodies, just of people who aren't any longer. Depending on what you believe, that's either really sad, kind of pointless, or it's poignant and makes sense. It could be a combination of those things, probably a little bit for everyone. Because the thing about death is it doesn't necessarily make sense to us. We can't really comprehend it, you know. I like to think of humans as a game-playing civilization because we justify our actions in the scope of whatever game our civilizations are playing or whatever game we're playing in our heads. But whatever we do, we are finite in some way because we don't live forever. We are mortal. And a story is mortal too. You know, often I've gotten stuck in my stories, maybe because not because I didn't like them, but because I liked them too much and I didn't want to see them go. Now, you know, if I was a more mature writer at the time, when I did these things, I probably would have just written the sequel, right? Like, just write the book, write another one with the same characters. That's what a lot of people would do. But me, there's a vibe about my stories that I want to keep in my head. And sometimes I've kept it in my head for years before I finish the book, or just have still not finished the book in some cases. So that's about where I'm at. Sorry for no interview. Obviously, circumstances were against us this week. But we'll be back soon. And I'll have another interview for you next week, I hope. So, thanks for listening. Stay safe out there. And, you know, remember to stop. Don't stop, actually. Just walk in your story world. Thanks for listening, writers. Have a good one. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and this has been A Live After Reading.